Penguin Random House Audio presents Dark Laboratory on Columbus, the Caribbean, and the Origins of the Climate Crisis. This is the author, Tao Leigh Goffe. To the islands, the coral reefs, the blue-footed boobies, the mountains made of guano, the Calcutta mongoose, the budding marijuana, and the volcanoes with which I have written this book. Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name, 1992. We are dreaming all wrong. Art is otherwise, all that is left able to lift the grime and glitter caked under eyelids and halt. Thereby our crippling dreaming. Truth is otherwise. It risks all to be born, to be unstoppably, irresistibly alive. Toni Morrison, The Foreigner's Home, 2018. Everything Flood Out, Bridget Tuttigran Rosie Bailey, 2013. A note on terminology. When we surrender to language that limits our capacity to identify the structures of power that enforce racism, we have already lost half the battle. A colorblind approach prevents identifying anything at all about systemic inequality. I use Black with a capital B to denote references to Black people. I use a lowercase b in reference to the color Black and abstract senses of Blackness and anti-Blackness. I use a lowercase b for brown because the term has a different political trajectory and is used by many disparate groups with varying and more diffuse meanings than the history of the Black Power movement. Relatedly, I use a lowercase w for white because while it is also an important racial category that should be spoken about more often, it does not have a coherent political history, community, or tradition, though white supremacy is a potent divisive force. Because there are many forms of slavery that vary as labor institutions across time and space, I use the specific terms chattel slavery and racial slavery to describe the European transatlantic trade of Africans who were enslaved. The distinction is important because historically and in the present, there are multiple violent forms of slavery, but none have treated humans as property to be bought and sold at auction, stripping people of their basic personhood in the way that enslavement of Africans took place during the European colonization of the Americas, a dehumanizing and racializing process that took place from the 16th to the 19th centuries. When referring to the system of temporary contract-enforced debt labor that coincided with and followed racial slavery in the 19th century, I use the term racial indenture. This nomenclature is distinct from the indentured servitude of white Europeans from an earlier period. Muddying the terms erases the racializing nature of the labor scheme for people in the 19th century who were primarily Asian, Chinese, and Indian, and were racialized by the process because of the proximity to racial slavery and Black people. There were also indentured laborers from Africa and Southeast Asia who were forcibly brought to the Caribbean. By referring to these people who rebelled against inhumane labor conditions as workers or servants, we belittle the fraught nature of volition and consent under the mutilation of the whip on Caribbean plantations. Race is a construct that is full of social meaning that translates as political power. I have carefully chosen the following terms not to enshrine false hierarchies, but to identify how people have historically identified themselves against the terms of colonial conquest. In regard to the people indigenous to the Americas, I use the related terms Amerindian, American Indian, Native, Native American, Indian, Indigenous, and First Nations, understanding that they are not synonymous in meaning. According to the regional context of what various indigenous peoples in different countries have historically called themselves, I alternate between terms. Relatedly, the overlap between the terms Indian, Columbus's misnomer used to describe Native Americans, and South Asian is pertinent to the premise of this book. In the Caribbean context, I will sometimes use East Indian, Indo-Caribbean, or Hindustani interchangeably and according to regional context. I use the terms enslaved African, African, and Afro, which are not interchangeable, to describe different Black identities, and avoid using the word slave or Negro or any of their derivations or translations in other European languages. I use the term Chinese in favor of Sino based on regional preference. Sino tends to have a foreign policy connotation in the Western world that can at times flatten Chinese heterogeneity. I avoid the term coolie because of the racial injury that it carries when spoken in varying national contexts to refer to Indian, Chinese, and Southeast Asian subsistence laborers and people. I do not use terms such as half to describe people or other racial fractions because the eugenicist logic of blood quantum used by the U.S. government to police Native peoples is so casually spread throughout our everyday language. Relatedly, ahistorical terms such as biracial are not useful to me or the arguments in this book. For similar reasons, the term mixed race is not useful to me or the arguments put forth in this book, though I recognize these are commonplace terms that others identify with. People of mixed heritage have existed for generations and centuries without such designations that can often serve to splinter possible political coalitions. Beginning to disavow these mathematical terms is a step toward rejecting these norms of valuation and categorization of human life on a pseudoscientific genetic scale we know often to be Eurocentric or anti-Black. Introduction. Mountain Ballads. Mountains hold the echoes of history. The vibrations and shockwaves of the climate crisis are written in stone. Absorbed over the course of geologic time dating back more than 4 billion years. These mountain ranges were once submerged underwater. If we measure the span of existence by the recent rock record, it tells a layered climate history of precious materials stolen from the earth, mountains of coral, gold, bauxite, and guano, sedimented. Time avalanches with the heaviness of histories of labor exploitation as we reckon with the overwhelming and inevitable ecological crises of the 21st century. Within each chapter of climate history exists a labor history, and we draw upon the energy of those who have gone before us. Those forced to extract from the land continue to be deemed disposable for the price of so-called technological progress. The racial regime determined who was forced to extract ores from the earth, and it continues to this day with unnamed millions mining cobalt to source lithium-ion batteries to satisfy the demand for the rechargeable batteries of our electric cars and smartphones. This is our current perverse geological reality of powering so-called green technologies and clean energy solutions. Standing at the precipice of climate collapse, we feel the increasing pressure for the planet to implode with each breath we take. Yet, as a global community, we continuously fail to address the origin of the problem. Without economic and historical analyses of the origins of the climate crisis, how can we expect to understand its sedimented layers? While it is easy to picture plumes of smoke as the primary output of global warming, we must ask questions about the global economy that preceded our dependence on fossil fuels and what remains unseen. The brutal order of plantations organized the world before there were smokestacks and factories. The economies and ideas of plantation slavery have irreparably scarred the natural environment. Before idyllic pastures, mass deforestation was necessary to clear the way for farming. Plantation owners and overseers mutilated the flesh of those they held captive under the whip. With each tree felled, carbon was released into the atmosphere. Sacred branches, hundreds of years old, that had witnessed the first European colonizers were raised in an instant. Gone with this botanical life were the multitude of...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?